Hello and welcome to your ultimate guide for the Illinois Real Estate Broker exam. My goal today is simple: give you everything you need to fully understand the key concepts, master them, and walk into your exam with total confidence. In this video we'll cover government powers, property taxation, land zoning, environmental regulations, private controls. With over 100 plus success stories, we have proven our videos will help you pass your exam on the first attempt. And remember, our website offers free exam guides and practice questions to help you ace your exam. You'll find the link in the description below, so be sure to check it out and get the resources you need to study smarter, not harder. So let's get started.
Now let us explore the 4 government powers over private land, essential for exam success. Even though property rights are strongly protected by the United States Constitution and the Illinois Constitution, the government still holds 4 traditional powers that limit what an owner can do. Memorizing these 4 powers is the foundation for everything else. Here is how the 4 powers work. Police power lets the government regulate property for public health, safety and welfare through zoning and codes. Eminent domain allows the government to take property for public use with just compensation. Taxation lets it levy property taxes. Escheat sends property to the state when an owner dies without heirs. To help these powers stick, try the mnemonic word PTE. The letter P stands for police power, the first E stands for eminent domain, the T stands for taxation, and the second E stands for escheat. Students who use PT can recall all 4 powers instantly, even when exam stress is building during the test. Let me give you an example. Imagine Chicago wants to widen a major road. It uses police power to enforce setback rules, taxation to fund the project, and eminent domain to take slivers of yards from adjacent owners. If an owner along the route dies with no heirs, escheat sends that parcel to Illinois. On your exam, this topic appears as a fact pattern asking you to identify which power applies. Watch out for questions that confuse eminent domain with police power. Police power regulates without compensation, while eminent domain always requires just compensation. That distinction wins many exam points and is worth memorizing now. Before we dive deeper, I want to mention something valuable for your preparation. I have created over 300 completely free practice questions that work hand in hand with everything we are covering today. You will find the link in the description below, and I really encourage you to bookmark it while you are thinking about it. Now let us look at property taxes and special assessments, which appear constantly on the Illinois broker exam. Ad valorem is Latin for according to value. Illinois property taxes are calculated based on assessed value multiplied by the local rate. These taxes fund schools, counties, municipalities, fire districts, libraries, and parks across the state. Here is how the Illinois property tax cycle flows. The county assessor estimates property value, typically at 1/3 of fair cash value outside Cook County. Equalization multiplies adjust assessments to produce the equalized assessed value. Exemptions like the general homestead exemption come off next. Taxing districts then levy what they need, setting the rate. Let me give you key Illinois exemptions. The general homestead exemption gives owner-occupants up to $6,000 of equalized assessed value, with $10,000 in Cook County. Seniors age 65 and older qualify for an additional $5,000 reduction. Income-qualified seniors can also freeze their value through the Senior Citizens Assessment Freeze. Let me walk through an example. Picture a Logan Square homeowner with property worth $150,000 in equalized value. She qualifies for the general homestead exemption of $10,000 in Cook County, dropping her taxable value to $140,000. The local tax rate is then applied to that reduced figure for her bill. Real property tax liens have super priority status, meaning they jump ahead of nearly all other liens, including existing mortgages. If taxes go unpaid after the second installment, the county treasurer holds an annual tax sale. Investors bid down the penalty rate they will accept, starting at 18%, and the winner receives a certificate of purchase. Here is the critical detail about Illinois tax sales. The residential property owner has 2 years and 6 months to redeem by paying back taxes plus accumulated penalty interest and subsequent costs. If the owner does not redeem within that window, the certificate holder can petition for a tax deed and gain marketable title. Now, let us distinguish ordinary taxes from special assessments because exam questions love this. Ad valorem taxes apply uniformly across a taxing district based on value and fund general operations. Special assessments only apply to parcels that specifically benefit from a public improvement like sidewalks or sewer extensions, with cost allocated by benefit received. What we just covered is exactly the type of material you will see in my free practice question bank. These are not basic recall questions either. They are designed to test your deep understanding of how Illinois tax mechanics actually work, just like the real broker exam questions you will face on test day. Now, let us move on to eminent domain and condemnation, which appears in almost every exam cycle. Eminent domain is the power of the sovereign to take private property for public use, while condemnation is the legal procedure used to carry out the taking. Think of eminent domain as the power and condemnation as the courthouse process. For a taking to be valid, 3 elements must be present. First, the taker must be a government entity or an entity delegated condemnation authority, like a utility or railroad. Second, the taking must be for a public use or public purpose. Third, just compensation equal to fair market value plus any severance damages must be paid. Here is where it gets interesting. In Kelo versus City of New London, the Supreme Court expanded public use to include economic development that creates jobs and tax revenue, even when property goes to a private developer. The decision caused backlash, and Illinois responded by passing the Illinois Eminent Domain Act, which restricts take-ins for private development. Let me walk through a partial taking example. Picture an Aurora homeowner with a 5-acre parcel worth $500,000. The Illinois Department of Transportation takes 1 acre worth $100,000 for a highway right-of-way. The remaining 4 acres drop from $400,000 to $300,000. The owner is owed $200,000. Inverse condemnation happens when the government takes property without going through formal eminent domain. The owner brings the lawsuit instead, which is why we call it inverse. A famous example is when a regulation becomes so restrictive it destroys all economic value, as in Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Council. That kind of regulatory taking still triggers compensation. On your exam, watch carefully for the difference between police power and eminent domain. Police power regulates without compensation, but eminent domain always requires payment. If a fact pattern says the government took property or restricted it so heavily that no economic use remains, think eminent domain or regulatory taking. Otherwise, think police power. I know we are covering a lot of detailed material, and you might wonder how to practice applying it all. That is exactly why I built those free practice questions I mentioned earlier. They walk you through fact patterns combining eminent domain, regulatory takings, and tax liens, so you can train your brain to spot the right issue. Now let us tackle zoning, the heart of land use controls and a heavy exam topic. Zoning divides a municipality into districts and regulates uses, building dimensions and densities within each district. The Supreme Court approved comprehensive zoning as a constitutional exercise of police power in the famous village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty Company decision in 1926. Common zoning district designations include residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and mixed use. Within residential, you might see R1 for large lots, single family, R2 for smaller lots, single family, and R3 for multifamily. Each district has its own bulk rules covering setbacks, height, lot coverage, and parking requirements for new construction. Here is a topic examiners love. A non-conforming use is a use that legally existed before new zoning rules made it prohibited. The use is grandfathered and can continue, but it cannot be expanded, cannot change to another non-conforming use, and cannot be re-established once abandoned. Many Illinois ordinances treat 6 to 12 months of non-use as abandonment. A variance is administrative relief from strict zoning rules granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals when strict application would cause unnecessary hardship. There are two flavors. A use variance permits a use not otherwise allowed in the zone and is very hard to obtain. An area variance lets you deviate from setback, height, or lot coverage requirements. A special use, sometimes called a conditional use, is different from a variance. The zoning ordinance already anticipates the use as permitted, but only with case-by-case review and conditions. Think of a daycare in a residential zone, a gas station with traffic concerns, or a drive-through restaurant. The board imposes conditions on hours and lighting. Here is the trick to telling these three apart on the exam. A variance is for hardship caused by unique property conditions. A special use is for an anticipated use that needs site-specific conditions. A rezoning is a legislative change to the map. The zoning board handles variances and special uses, while the city council handles rezonings. Now, let us cover the different kinds of zoning map changes. Rezoning is a legislative act by the city council that changes either the map or the text of the ordinance. Spot zoning is a pejorative term for rezoning that singles out one parcel inconsistent with the surrounding area, often to benefit the owner. Courts can strike spot zoning down. Downzoning rezonates property to a less intense use, like multifamily into single family or commercial into residential. Downzoning can reduce values and sometimes gives rise to takings claims if it destroys all economic use. Upzoning is the opposite. It rezones property to a more intense use, like single family into multifamily, and usually increases value. Planned unit developments, or PUDs, are a flexible zoning tool that lets developers design integrated projects with mixed uses, varied lot sizes, and shared open space. The municipality grants design flexibility in exchange for amenities like parks, trails, and higher design standards. Cluster zoning is a PUD variant where homes are grouped on part of the site. When raw land is divided into smaller lots, subdivision regulations control the process. Developers typically start with a sketch plan, move to a preliminary plat with public hearings, prepare engineering plans, post improvement bonds, build streets and utilities, and finally record a final plat after council approval. Once recorded, those new lots become legally divisible parcels. Illinois has its own Plat Act that governs how raw land can be divided. The Act requires a licensed land surveyor to prepare the plat and requires recording with the county. Several exemptions exist. The big one is the 5-acre exemption. Dividing land into parcels larger than 5 acres with no new streets escapes Plat Act requirements. Picture a farmer in McHenry County who wants to split his 50-acre farm into two 25-acre tracts for his children. Since each new tract is over 5 acres and no new road is needed, the Plat Act exemption applies, and no formal plat is required, but the county may still require local subdivision approval. Building codes set minimum construction standards that protect health and safety. Most Illinois municipalities adopt the International Building Code for commercial work and the International Residential Code for 1- and 2-family homes. The Illinois Plumbing Code and the Illinois Energy Conservation Code apply statewide. A certificate of occupancy is issued at the end of construction confirming the building is safe. Remember that mastering these concepts takes real practice and active application. The free practice questions are designed to help you take what you are learning and turn it into exam-ready skills. You will see questions on plat exemptions, variance criteria, and subdivision steps that mirror exactly what shows up on the broker exam in question after question. Now let us talk about environmental regulations, which can become surprise exam questions. The Federal Clean Water Act regulates discharges into waters of the United States, including most wetlands, through Section 404 permits issued by the Army Corps of Engineers. The National Environmental Policy Act requires environmental impact statements for major federal actions affecting the human environment. The most testable federal environmental law is CRCA, also known as Superfund. It creates joint and several liability for cleaning up hazardous substance contamination. 4 categories of parties can be liable: current owners and operators, owners and operators at the time of disposal, generators of hazardous substances, and transporters who selected the disposal site for the waste. The innocent landowner defense lets a current owner escape circular liability if they meet 3 conditions. First, they acquired the property after the disposal. Second, they conducted all appropriate inquiry before purchase, which typically means ordering a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. Third, they take reasonable steps after discovering contamination to prevent further releases of hazardous materials. Lead-based paint is heavily regulated under Federal Title 10. For homes built before 1978, sellers must disclose known lead-based paint and hazards, deliver the Protect Your Family from Lead pamphlet, and give the buyer a 10-day window to inspect or test. Violations carry civil penalties of around $19,500 per occurrence. Illinois adds its own radon disclosure rule under the Illinois Radon Awareness Act. Sellers of residential property with 1 to 4 units must provide the Illinois Disclosure of Information on Radon Hazards plus the EPA pamphlet before the purchase contract is signed. This is purely a disclosure obligation. There is no testing or remediation requirement under the Act. FEMA maps flood-prone areas through flood insurance rate maps. Properties in special flood hazard areas, also called the 100-year floodplain, face mandatory flood insurance if a federally regulated mortgage is involved. Building rules under the National Flood Insurance Program typically require the lowest floor to sit at or above the base flood elevation. As we wrap up this section, remember that understanding these environmental concepts is just step 1. The real mastery comes from applying them, which is exactly where those free practice questions become invaluable. They are completely free, designed for Illinois broker exam success, and they walk you through every disclosure rule and circular defense you need. Let us shift gears now to private controls on land use, which the exam frequently tests. Private controls are restrictions created by private parties through deeds, covenants, and association documents rather than government regulation. Common forms include deed conditions, deed restrictions, subdivision covenants known as CC and Rs, condominium and homeowner association rules, and equitable servitudes that run with the land. Subdivision, CC and Rs, which stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions, are rules a developer records when creating a subdivision. They control everything from minimum home size, exterior materials, and paint colors to whether you can park a boat in your driveway. CC and Rs run with the land, which means they bind every future owner, not just the first buyer. Condominium associations and homeowner associations enforce private rules through monthly assessments, fines, and even liens on units that violate. In Illinois, condominium associations operate under the Condominium Property Act and have strong enforcement powers, including the ability to foreclose on unpaid assessments. Buyers should review association documents during their due diligence period to avoid surprises after closing. Private controls are enforced by injunctions and damages. A neighbor who violates a CC and R can be ordered to remove the violating structure or pay damages to compensate the harm. The right to enforce typically belongs to other lot owners in the subdivision or to the association itself. Restrictions can be terminated by mutual agreement or expiration. Here is the key exam distinction. Public controls like zoning come from the government and apply equally within a district. Private controls come from private parties and apply only to the specific land they cover. If a question mentions an ordinance or board of appeals, think public. If it mentions a deed, covenant, or association, think private. I want to remind you again about those free practice questions waiting in the description. 300 plus questions, completely free, designed for the Illinois broker exam, all written to mimic the way PSI actually phrases its questions. Bookmark the link now so you have it ready tonight for your next study session of focus practice. Let us circle back briefly to escheat, because exam writers love this concept. Escheat is the reversion of property to the state when an owner dies intestate, meaning without a will and leaves no heirs. In Illinois, the Probate Act lays out the order of succession from spouse and descendants down through parents, siblings, and more remote kin before escheat happens. In real life, escheat of real estate is rare because almost always some cousin can be found. Personal property like dormant bank accounts and uncashed checks. Escheats far more often. The Illinois State Treasurer, Unclaimed Property Division, handles those funds under the Revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act, and owners can usually reclaim them by filing a claim. Let us touch on Supreme Court cases that appear on broker exams. Loretto found that even a tiny permanent physical invasion is a taking, like a required cable box. Lucas held that a regulation destroying all economic use is a per se taking. Penn Central created a 3-factor balancing test for less extreme takings. Nolan and Dolan demand nexus and proportionality. Historic preservation is a smaller exam topic but still appears. The National Register of Historic Places, run by the National Park Service, recognizes historic significance and unlocks federal rehabilitation tax credits worth 20% for income-producing certified historic structures. Many municipalities have local historic districts requiring a certificate of appropriateness before owners can change exterior features. Growth management tools include adequate public facilities ordinances, impact fees, urban growth boundaries, and phased development plans. Moratoriums temporarily halt new permits or specific uses, while a community studies an issue or waits for infrastructure to catch up. Moratoriums must be reasonable in duration and supported by a legitimate purpose, or they risk being struck down as regulatory takings. Let me share the most common mistakes students make on this material. Confusing variance with special use trips up many candidates. Forgetting that property taxes are paid in arrears in Illinois is another classic error. And missing that special assessments apply only to benefited parcels, not to everyone in the district, costs easy points every test cycle. As we wrap up this detailed overview, remember that understanding all these concepts is just the first step. The real mastery comes from applying them, which is where those free practice questions become invaluable. They are completely free and designed specifically for Illinois broker exam success. You have nothing to lose by trying a few tonight. Let us bring everything together. You now understand the 4 government powers over land. The Illinois property tax cycle with its assessment, equalization, exemptions, and rate steps. The difference between eminent domain and police power, and how regulatory take-ins can trigger compensation. You also know the 3 flavors of zoning relief and the Plat Act 5-acre exemption. Notice how these concepts integrate. A single fact pattern might mention a Cook County parcel facing down zoning, a Plat Act question about subdivision into 4-acre lots, an environmental disclosure issue about radon, and a certificate of occupancy problem all at once. The broker exam loves stacking issues, which is why understanding how the pieces fit matters most. You have done the hard work of building a real foundation today. The next step is practice, and that is exactly where my free question bank comes in. 300 plus practice questions completely free, written for Illinois brokers, designed to test the exact concepts we just covered. The link is waiting for you in the description below. With the depth of knowledge you have built today, combined with practice from those questions, you will be incredibly well prepared on exam morning. Stay confident, keep moving through the questions, and remember that every concept ties back to how Illinois balances private property rights against the public interest in healthy communities.